And our guest speakers for tonight. Thank you for being here. It's a wonderful venue for an exciting forum about to begin. But Mr. Mayor, I must take you to task. I was going to try and run up those steps like you did. But then you referred to 65-year-olds as being elderly. And I thought I'd better not embarrass you because I'm past 65 and run up those stairs, so I took my time. When thinking about what I should talk to you about tonight, I was thinking of the past and the future. We're in a time zone now where a lot of things are starting to reach a centenary. The Lions of Turkey are reaching 50 years, or have reached 50 years. Our own LCIF is almost 50 years. Next year will begin, I guess, 100 years ago, the start of World War I. At the end of that period, in 1917, Melvin Jones had a dream. Almost 100 years ago. On the 25th of April 1915, not far from here at Gallipoli, Australia and New Zealand were in battle with Turkey. And now I'm standing here almost 100 years later in Turkey speaking to you. Your slogan, which says bridging culture through service, is very apt for that type of environment, because through service we can bridge the culture and gaps. Represented in the Europa Forum, almost 40 different countries and cultures, and yet here we gather under two words: we serve. We're in more countries than the United Nations, and yet we can come together in peace and harmony under the banner of Lions. When I sit and talk with politicians, they want to know how we do it. How can people from different religions, races and cultures all sit together and have a meal and not argue, but be friends? Because that's what Lions do every day all around the world. We have a tradition, a history going back almost 100 years. But where does that leave us for the future? What is the future for Lions? Where will we be in another 100 years? Who knows? Who knows where we'll be in 10 years' time with the way things change in this world, particularly with communication and the way we communicate today. Hands up, all my Facebook friends. My God. I won't have anything up tonight, I'm sorry. But look what that's done. I ran out of space on my first page, my personal page, with 5,000 friends. We started a second page in May, which now has almost 6,000 on it. And we're communicating each day backwards and forwards, sometimes several times a day. Communication today is totally different than what it was 10 years ago. Recently at a meeting in Oakbrook, we had some educators there, and part of that we had the people from Microsoft there, and they were asked a question: where do you see technology in the next 5 years? And he went, I have no idea. So if Microsoft can't work it out, how can we? But that's the world that we are living in at the moment. Totally different to 100 years ago when Melvin Jones had a dream. Are our services required today as they were in 1917? Yes, more so than ever, but in a different way. We had our first speaker, Doctor, talk about education. Education, our program on education is becoming so important in all parts of the world. And that's why we agreed to take it on for 10 years. But at the end of that 10 years, we won't have even scratched the surface of illiteracy. Maybe we make a dent, but unless we make a start, then it's not going to happen. And we've made the start. I look at microfinancing for poor people, and it was referred to there briefly on one of the slides. We've started some projects in India. Just a trial with a company called ASA, who's been at it for many years, is quite happy to work with Lions and set up these programs. To date, in the first trial, 250 women are now earning an income through microfinance with just a $100,000 base. That's the power of what Lions can do. That's how we can expand our operation. And that is the future, totally different to what it was in 1917. It was a different world then to what it is today. But the need for service is more so than ever. As I said, it may be different, but it's still there. It's in your community. Your community needs you today. They need you tomorrow. And if you think that you live in a community where you're not needed, I would suggest that you go and have a real look at your community. You will find a need for a Lions Club. You will find a need for Lions type service. Each and every one of you in your communities will do that if you ask. So where are we going? What are we going to be doing? That's up to you. But let me tell you one story, two stories. That recently I had the experience in Peru. I was held up at the airport in Lima for 2 hours because of engine problems. And the airline insisted on fixing the engine problem before we left, which I thought was a good idea. So when we arrived, it was almost dark in a little town called Helio. And the first thing the Lions wanted me to do was look at a project. And I'd just flown from Chicago to Dallas to Lima and to Helio. And I thought I really wanted to go to a hotel and sort of have a rest and a wash. But they insisted I go to the slums of Helio. And when I talk about slums, I mean slums. Dirt roads, dirt tracks. Houses, well, you could loosely call them houses. But in the middle of it was a hospital built about 8 years ago by the Lions. This hospital was called Jones Hospital in honour of the founder. And as I was being shown around the hospital, I noticed that there was a young boy following with the director of nursing who was showing me around. And I was quite intrigued with this young fellow, and he was hanging on to the director, he wouldn't let her go. We got to the end of the tour and I asked her, what's the story with this young boy? And she said, well, it's quite sad, really. This young boy, when his mother became pregnant, the father abandoned them. When he was born, the mother abandoned him. And he happened to be born in the Jones Hospital on the day it was opened. So guess what they christened him? Melvin Jones. So I can say now I've met Melvin Jones. The only difference is I've added Junior on because I didn't want to cause any confusion. So he's now known as Melvin Jones Jr. But this boy was like, you could describe him as a living dead. His face was expressionless, his eyes were dead. He was 10 years old, had never been to school, badly malnourished, living with his grandmother who had no money. And I said, well, what about, does he want to go to school? And the matron, the nursing director said he would love to go to school. He sits and watches the children go to school, but we can't afford it. $2,000 a year. To educate, clothe, books, feed. For some of us, we probably spend that at Starbucks in a year. And yet here's this little boy, he couldn't go. So my Facebook friends would know I put the story up and asked for some money. By the end of the weekend, I wanted enough for 12 months for him to go to school. We didn't quite make it. We got $1,500, but the local Lions tipped in and we got $2,000 so he could go to school for the first year. But I said, that's no good. 1 year is going to be a waste unless we can continue. So I went to the Public Relations Department at our recent board meeting and I told them the story. And they said, what do you want? I said, I want $12,000 public relations grant. I want you to follow this boy for the next 6 years. Let the Lions of the world see that this has made a difference in the life of one person. One little boy will be able to go to school, get an education, be fed and looked after. They said, fine, you've got it. So now Melvin Jones Jr. is going to be, I guess, the face of the Reading Action program, so that we have somebody that we can look at and say, yes, we did that. We did that for Melvin. I had a young lady working with me as a translator. She was not a lion. And after this had happened, I said to her, what did you know about lions before you got this job with me, translating? She said, nothing. And I said, what do you think of lions? And she said, you're all old. And I said, you're right. But would you join Lions? And she said, I would, but not your club. So I said, okay, what say? We start a new club with young people your age. And she came back the next day and she said, I've got 3 new members plus myself for the new club. And Melvin Jones is going to be our project. We're going to look after him and make sure that what you want done will happen. That's the power of Lions. That's what we can achieve. So Lions, if you ever think that you're irrelevant, that there is no future for our organisation, think about Melvin Jones Jr. as well as Melvin Jones. Because Melvin Jones is the history, Melvin Jones Jr. is the future. He has a dream. We're going to make that dream come true. And if there's any of you remember the musical South Pacific, there was a song in there that the big Samoan lady sang. And in the words of that song, she said, and I'm not going to sing, my wife is just gone. If you haven't got a dream, how do you make a dream come true? Lions of Europa, get yourself a dream.